Hello, listeners. Welcome to another episode of Geopolitical Cousins. One quick show note. I have a sore throat. I don't know if you can hear it in my voice. If at any point my voice sounds subdued or tinny, that's what's going on. Just wanted to say that. Otherwise, obviously, we hit the Iran war. We give happy trails to Viktor Orbán, and we deal with sports and politics in ways that only the cousins can. Email me at jacob@jacobshapiro.com if you have any questions, comments, concerns about the podcast. Shout out to Blue Copper Salt Lake City. We mentioned you in the episode, but I'll mention you up front. Thank you for sending Marko some whole beans. We appreciate you. And if you are a listener and you are in Salt Lake City, Utah, check out Blue Copper Coffee. I think that's all. Emails to jacob@jacobshapiro.com. Take care of the people you love. Cheers. See you out there. All right, listeners, it's Friday, April 17th. It's 7:25 p.m. Central Time in the United States. The cousins have come back together. Cousin, have you heard of Kirk Moore? Does that name mean anything to you?
No.
Kirk Moore is an Oklahoma high school principal who a couple of days ago, apparently an active shooter came into this Oklahoma high school. It's like 60 miles south of Oklahoma City. He had two semi-automatic handguns, walked into the lobby, shot at one person, missed, had a malfunctioning handgun. This high school principal, Kirk Moore, ran at the shooter and tackled him, got shot in the leg while he did it, but disarmed him, had some people come over and take the gun away from him, and no other students were killed, and the guy is booked. I share this because have any of you heard of Kirk Moore? Like, these are the stories that we should actually be talking about, like high school principals tackling men to save children's lives. And instead, we're talking about all the terrible things that are happening in the world. That's how I wanted to start the podcast, guys.
Hey, man, God bless that guy. That's incredible.
It's awesome. Like, look for the helpers, as Mr. Rogers would say. I have a lot of Mr. Rogers in my life. Cousin, why don't we start with what everybody is... Oh, and also, if you have not seen the Geopolitical Cousins bingo that Marko's friend published, you should go ahead and check it out. On Marko's X, we'll also put a link to it in the show notes. You should make a drinking game out of it. You've probably already taken 2 shots by now because I've said cousin twice already, and I'm just going to be like a stereotype of myself as we go because I want you to get increasingly inebriated.
And let me tell you what it means. Let me tell you what that means, right? Like, let me tell you what the big... just kidding. It's on the bingo card. So
I actually loved the bingo card because when I first started podcasting, I had the testicular fortitude to ask my wife, so what do you think of the podcast? And she said, honestly, Jacob, you say right at the end of every other sentence, and every time you say it, I like don't want to listen anymore. And I like was so happy that I don't say that anymore and that it wasn't on the bingo card. But once you've heard that, you start hearing it everywhere. Like one of the reasons I actually had trouble with Bill Simmons and Russillo is because they say right at the end of every other sentence. And I think part of it is this discomfort that people have with seeming intelligent, like they know things. So they sort of nod to the listeners. Well, you know, like 30% of oil goes through the Strait of Hormuz, right? Because they don't want to just say like, yes, 30% of oil goes through the Strait of Hormuz. I know this because I know this. You don't know this because you're busy doing other things. We don't need to communicate. Anyway, so I was actually happy with the bingo card because there was nothing on my bingo that I was like, like I should work on that. Like all those things felt like very authentic.
I think the one thing that I should definitely work on is interrupting you mid-sentence, but like that's just where the enthusiasm come in. I mean it out of love. You know,
We're cousins. Don't stop interrupting me. I'll keep interrupting.
Anyways, listen, like I'm not going to stop interrupting you. Okay, let me just make that clear. Okay, in fact, I'm going to start cooking on giving some shout outs to rappers and also Luka Doncic. The semi-Serbian awesome guy, the best since John Wick movies. I'm just trying to put everything on the bingo card in one sentence. I think I got a lot. Yeah, I got enough.
This is not why the listeners are here. I hadn't seen any of the John Wick movies, and then I had a flight. I forget what, it was a very, very long flight, and I killed all the John Wick movies in one flight. It was like one of the best days of my life.
So you basically saw the same amount of people murdered as died in this conflict between Iran, US, and Israel.
Well, that's a good segue.
Unfortunately.
Well, I mean, should we offer a mea culpa and say apparently it all did hinge on Lebanon because ceasefire in Lebanon is the skeleton key to what opens it up? I will say, however, though, Iran's foreign minister, I'll quote him 11 hours ago on X, In line with the ceasefire in Lebanon, the passage for all commercial vessels through the Strait of Hormuz is declared completely open for the remaining period of the ceasefire. On the coordinated route is already announced by Ports and Maritime Organization of the Islamic Republic of Iran. So it's an inverse Gandalf. Instead of you shall not pass, you shall pass. And you've got an Iranian foreign minister standing at the pass. But the Speaker of Iran's parliament, whose name I have not learned to pronounce yet, sorry, it's kind of hard to keep up with these guys, 2 hours ago posted, the President of the United States made 7 claims in 1 hour, all 7 of which were false. They did not win the war with these lies, and they will not get anywhere in negotiations either. With the continuation of the blockade, the Strait of Hormuz will not remain open. There is also, there's a bunch of reporting out there. Axios, I think, has the most definitive is the wrong word, but seems to have the most information. They have a 3-page or a draft of a 3-page plan with the U.S. and Iran are negotiating over an end to the war. It seems to involve the Iranians get lots of money by promising to hand over nuclear material and agreeing to a moratorium on nuclear development. And they promise that all of their nuclear plants are going to be above ground. I promise that I won't say cousin on this podcast anymore. Like that promise is worth just as much as that. All of which has been contradicted already by the president in some of his social media statements and other things out there. And the last thing I wanted to lead off with, and then we can dive into it, is it's amazing how much of this is happening on X. Like even Reuters, the wires and things like that, when they're citing the Iranian foreign minister, it's not a statement from the Iranian government. It's not like they have a reporter who's talking to him at a press conference. It says, oh, he said this on X. So now this is the front page Reuters story, which any of us could do. Like I get, it's like the death of media, which I think is going to get to something that you want to talk about towards the end. But I was just struck by that because it used to be that a lot of these media organizations, what made them so valuable is they had people on the ground and they had people with connections and they could actually scoop things for you and tell you things. And all the scoops here, they're on X. Like just go on X and read like what the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament is saying. You know as much apparently as the articles that are defining the media environment around all this. Where do you want to start in taking apart whether the war is over, is not over, whether it matters for global markets? We have U.S. markets making a third day of record highs here. Where do you want to start?
Yeah, so it's very interesting. I mean, first of all, this is the first time, maybe not the first time, but I do think there's a serious disagreement here in Iran. And so you nailed it. Like it's pretty significant that the speaker, I'm going to just say his name is Ghalibaf. Just going to go for it.
You have more courage than I do. Go for it.
I'm just going to go for it. First of all, he's very active on Twitter and has always been. So shout out to that. Good for him. But yeah, I mean, he did not just like contradict President Trump, but more importantly, he contradicted his own foreign minister. So the action on April 17th from the market perspective was initiated not by President Trump saying the war was over and the deal is there. I see a lot of folks on X kind of saying like, well, you can't really listen to President Trump. What does he know? He keeps saying this or that. No. Just to be clear, it started with Tehran. Like President Trump had already shifted into deal-making mode like 2 days ago. And so this morning, the Iranians kind of confirmed it. And then, Ghalibaf came in and is going after the foreign minister. Now, one thing to understand is that he is very close to the IRGC. And so if I had to pick between the foreign minister and the deputy speaker of the parliament, by the way, deputy, normally the deputy speaker of the parliament is like, who? In this case, you kind of have to listen to this guy. He was part of the negotiations. By the way, he himself went, and so did the foreign minister. So both of them were there in Islamabad. But he's also, seen as kind of the political face of the IRGC right now. And so it is a serious setback to like 24 hours of just like wanton, like, yay, let's go, YOLO. But look, on the other hand, the ceasefire has held. And I don't know about you, Jacob. I mean, you and I have been watching wars and geopolitics for, all of our professional career. Have you ever seen a ceasefire as clean as this one?
That's a good question.
Usually
it wasn't that clean at the start, but the last couple of days have been pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, even the start, like, the numbers collapsed and right away, like pretty much. And all three sides, including Israel, which was always kind of the question mark, have abided by it. And then this morning when...
Well, yeah, in the last couple of days, I mean, when it started, it looked like Iran and the U.S. were abiding by it, and Israel was like, by the way, we're
Yeah,
gonna
we're
just
not.
destroy Beirut.
Okay, but that's
like,
different.
while we're at it.
You know, like, okay, fine. Yes, fair enough. Yes, they definitely carpet bombed Beirut. But overall, I think that, look, I mean, everyone's abiding by the ceasefire. Iran has had 900 vessels, I think, in the Persian Gulf that they could have taken pot shots at, really since February 28th, by the way. They haven't done that. So I think that despite the kind of occasional, like, we're not negotiating, like, brother, come on, we all know you guys are negotiating. That's pretty clear to everyone to see. So, but I do think that it's a sign that maybe internally in Tehran, there's some, maybe the knives are out, you know, because it's the US government really in the West that has been contradictory in their statements in the past. This is really the first time that we're seeing like real contradiction between Iranian officials. I also thought it was really hilarious, and shout out to Le Shrub, the epic Le Shrub. Yeah, he's a great guy. On X for pointing out, this was a great statement from Le Shrub. This is proper etiquette. The Iranian dude, he clearly also struggles to both spell and pronounce Kalibov. The Iranian dude.
I don't think Mr. Kalibov or whatever his name is can pronounce Shapiro or Popich. So
or Le Shrub, to be fair.
Yeah.
So Le Shrub
French,
goes,
like the Iranians like the French, so maybe they could do French, but they're definitely not going to do Serbian or Jews.
But listen, it was the Iranian dude disputed Trump's claims after the futures closed. So that's proper etiquette. Very polite and in line with warfare rules during the golden age of grift. So, hey, maybe, you know, like maybe the Iranians themselves are out there closing some trades, making sure that the slightly antagonistic X tweet comes after the market is closed. But anyways, look, I just think the trajectory is where it is. I think both sides have mutual assured destruction, and I think we're still like lining up for some sort of negotiations. But I'm open to that being wrong. Obviously, there was a proposal to just freeze the conflict for 6 months. You know, figure it out after that. Why would Iran agree to all these things? I mean, not to like belabor this point, but they do have to also think about cashing in their leverage. The big question everybody's asking is nuclear fissile material. I was in DC this entire week, and that did come up in conversations I had with various officials running around DC. You know, what do you do with this like nuclear material? First of all, as President Trump said today, like, we don't actually know where it is. We might have to dig it out. Maybe some of it is above ground. Maybe some of it is below ground. You can't really use special forces to take it out if it's buried. Because what are you going to do? You're going to have like SEALs commandeer like a bulldozer and then like drill 40 meters underground. I mean, they're going to, you know, people are going to take pot shots at them while they're doing that. So you kind of need the Iranians to bring it up before you deal with it. I think that's obviously a big question for a lot of people. What do you do with this 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium? And I don't really have a good answer for it, but I also don't think that it's something you may be able to physically deal with, because it could very well be very deep underground. By the way, Russia has offered to take it, as they have in the past. So, you know, God bless Putin and Russia. Thank you for being such a source of stability and peace in the world.
Yeah, because Russian polities have such a great track record in safeguarding nuclear material. Thanks for that, Vladimir. The other part of this is, how are you supposed to verify that the Iranians brought out all the material that they have and that they handed all of it over? Like, there's zero trust here. But I think the deeper and more cynical point is, and this is to me what the Axios report and what the negotiations shows you, the United States doesn't care about nuclear material.
Yeah,
this isn't about nuclear weapons. This was never about nuclear weapons. This is about nuclear weapons for Israel. And for Israel, this is existential, because Iran has threatened them with nuclear weapons and they're in the neighborhood. And that's the one thing that Iran could do to actually wipe Israel off the map, which I still think mutually assured destruction holds. I don't think these are religious crazies. You know, we can go down that whole route. But the Israelis care about this. The Americans don't care about this. Donald Trump is not going to give up his blockbuster ending to this season of reality TV because the Iranians didn't hand over nuclear material. He's going to say, he's going to try to claim victory, but his base isn't going to be verifying that every single bit of this has gotten out. You cited Lashrub. Hamid Reza Azizi is sort of my favorite Iran analyst right now. He's been on my podcast a couple of times, and I thought his analysis today was really good. He talked about how uncertain and how volatile things seem to be, but he pointed out that what seems to be happening is it's not a breakthrough moment, but it looks like a process of de-escalation where both sides get to claim victories and get to climb down the ladder. We've been climbing up the ladder of
Yeah.
escalation. They're allowing themselves some rungs down the ladder so that they can at least bring things from a boil back to a simmer, which honestly everything becomes a little bit childish because then it just feels like a couple of man children tweeting at each other and yelling at each other about their gripes while the rest of the global economy is like, okay, but like we need it open now. Like you say it's open. Is it open? Is the blockade blocking it? Like what's going on? And I'll also just say, like, I had a fertilizer expert on the show, on my show, interviewed him yesterday. It'll come out Monday. He was still freaking out. Energy analysts are still freaking out. They've gone to it's closed to, well, even if it opens tomorrow, we've lost this much from the market and things like that. So you have no relaxation from those experts that are in place. And I don't know quite to do with that. So
my favorite is Rory Johnston. Shout out to a fellow Canadian.
I love him. We should have him on, by the way.
We should.
I bet he would come on.
Oh, absolutely. He's awesome. And he's one of these guys who's just like, wait, like, there's no oil. Yeah, you guys know that. And we're all like, fuck you, man. Like, fuck you, party pooper. Shut up, man.
Oil? But who said something about oil?
Bitch, you cooking? The famous Dave Chappelle line. Bitch, you cooking? Listen.
He was so forward thinking with Black Bush. Was it just like aside from me, one of the funniest sketches of all time, one of the most deeply analytical sketches
Yellow
of all time.
Cake. Pray to God you don't drop that shit.
Pray to God you don't need that shit.
But listen, look, here's what I would say to Rory Johnston and your fertilizer guy. I hear you, brother. Nobody gives a fuck. And here's the reason. If we know the Strait of Hormuz will be opened, yes, there'll be some delays. Yes, there'll be some literal physical like interruptions. Food prices will go higher, but we know it's temporary. So nobody needs to riot about it. That is the issue. I mean, food is a little bit of a different story because obviously different countries have different bread baskets, and in different bread baskets, food is much, much, much more important from a CPR perspective and so on. But like, yeah.
It's also kind of late for that. Like Ireland's already rioted about it. Philippines has already rioted about it. So I guess you stop the rioting like at a certain point. But yeah.
But like one thing I would say about the earlier point where you said that we've been on a de-escalatory path. I mean, we've kind of been on a de-escalatory path for a while, though. I wouldn't say that that's been the market effectively bottomed on like March 30th. And not because it's like smoking hopium, but because the de-escalation has begun earlier. We've had a 2-week ceasefire, effectively. It's held. Everyone's been, aside from Israel and Lebanon, let's leave that aside for a second, but for the most part, Iran, US, and Israel have been gentlemanly in their relationship. And that's not normal for anyone listening to this and saying like, oh, they're just waiting to reload. Well, that's not normal. And second of all, we haven't actually seen much reloading happen. You can't really reload some of the munitions that the US has already spent that quickly. And we haven't actually seen a huge surge in troops. I believe there was a report that they were going to send perhaps another 10,000 troops. Great. Now we have 18,000 or maybe 28,000. It's not enough for anything in any way cogent. I just I don't see evidence objectively that this is all a ruse by both sides because they're itching to go to war. Well, then go to war.
Well, I think the bet may be that, well, and I want to be careful about reading too much into Iran because Iran has made serious mistakes here as well. I don't think they've been perfect by any means. But I think Iran is happy to take what's on the table right now. Like, I think this is a good enough, especially if there's going to be recognition that they control the Strait of Hormuz. Because even the foreign minister, what the foreign minister said, the most important thing in his statement, in some sense, was not that the Strait of Hormuz was open, but that it was open along the path that the Iranian whatever ministry of whatever said. So he's very clearly telegraphing, hey, we're the captains here. This is not about the U.S. blockade. You want to go through the Strait of Hormuz? Like, sure, it's fine. It's open to commercial vessels. But if you do what we say, and you have Wall Street Journal accounts that are saying, and you still have to pay the toll. And then you have other guys like our good friend, our shipping friend, who came on and he said, "Yeah, are they really paying the toll? Is that crazy? Has anyone been verifying that?" And that goes to the media point that I've been talking about. But for the Iranians, if the end all of this is that they are in control of the Strait of Hormuz and that the world understands that they can flick the switch off and on, and if the United States' reputation has been tarnished by its involvement in this, okay, then maybe you do make some kind of superficial deal where you say, okay, fine, have our material. We promise not to make a nuclear weapon for however many years you want. We promise everything is above ground and everything is fine. And for President Trump, I think that'll be enough. I think that's all he needs. And it'll be a superficial deal, and it won't actually respond to the security concerns, and it won't respond to the weight of everything that he brought up. But that's not what he's about. He wants to move on to the next episode. He needs to end it and say, I did it. I ended the nuclear threat. Strait of Hormuz is open again. Everything's cool. Like, let's move on to the next thing. And the Iranians, I think, can give him that and also like have this leverage. Now, I think the way that we're wrong is if, to your point, there's disagreement inside Iran, if there's disagreement inside the U.S. administration, if the delta between what Iran is willing to accept and what the U.S. is willing to accept just is too far. Like if Trump wakes up in a Diet Coke bender, Saturday evening while markets are closed, and he's like, "Wait, what did I agree to? What did I do? Like, I see these guys, they're still saying bad things about me. I can't believe this. And Israel's still bombing Lebanon. I prohibited them from bombing Lebanon."
Which was awesome, by the way.
Yeah, I'm going to fire off some more tweets. Like, it's very unstable. Like, it could go either direction.
First of all, I just think for the sake of humanity, I think that Susan Wiles needs to carry some Snicker bars with her, like the mini ones, so that like we can like quiet down some of the sugar deficiency tweets. Also want to shout out the next episode. Great Dr. Dre track. So it just came into my head as you started talking about it, that President Trump wants to move on. Can we make some room right now on the podcast for my TDS DS?
Yeah, but this is a safe space for your
TDS. Can I have a manifestation of my Trump
please,
derangement syndrome?
You put up with my TDS, so it would be hypocritical if I didn't allow you your TDS. Yeah.
Appreciate it, cousin. That's why there's real love here. All right. So look, I'm going to make the case for why this isn't a superficial deal. Okay.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Tell me.
It's a superficial deal. I can't actually make that case. But hear me out, though. Hear me out. Let's say that President Trump gets exactly what President Obama got, which is JCPOA.
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, I always thought that Obama's JCPOA was fine. But,
yeah.
So like if you're...
It only had one big mistake.
Which was what?
That it was not ratified as a treaty in the United States.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, fine. If you have TDS and you're liberal and you don't like JCPOA 2.0 that President Trump gets with Iran, like then you should have not liked it with Obama. So let's, leave that aside. But here's the difference between President Trump getting the same deal. President Obama froze Iran's capabilities at 2015 level, more or less. I mean, I know a lot of people criticize it for various things. Let's just all agree, for the sake of my rant here, that he did.
Mm-hmm.
But President Trump bombed Iran for a month and a half. So he won't be freezing Iran's capabilities at 2026 levels. I mean, he won't be freezing them at Stone Age level either. Like, let's pump the brakes on that. But anyone who sits here and says, oh, you haven't eroded Iran's capabilities, like, come on, guy, come on. And, there's all this, like, media coming out saying, like, hey, Iran still has some missiles. Fine. They do. I'm sure they do. But, like, let's not all pretend they didn't just fire thousands of missiles at their neighbors and that the U.S. and Israel didn't bomb them for a month and a half. Let's be objective here. Of course, Iran's capabilities have been eroded, not eliminated. This is like the people who wanted the COVID vaccine to be 100% effective. They're probably walking around still with like masks when they go outside. Like those people, I don't want to hear from them. Like they can stay with their mask somewhere. Yes, President Trump absolutely eroded like Iran's capabilities. And so if he gets the same deal as Obama, it's not actually the same deal because it's freezing Iran's capabilities, I would assume, at some worse position from Iran's perspective. Like, how much has this month and a half of intense bombing set Iran back? Are they back at 2015 level? Are they back at 2010 level? Are they back in early 2000s level? I don't know, but it seems to me like a lot of nuclear facilities have been struck. One of the reasons that Iran, there were rumors that they're okay pausing their enrichment indefinitely. I think that's what Trump said. Of course they are. They can't enrich. What are you talking? Where do you think their centrifuges are? Like, of course they cannot enrich a single thing. They're all destroyed. And I would assume that if they're not destroyed, then, IDF and the US Air Force, they need new bosses and new management. But a month and a half of intense bombing by two of the most powerful air forces in the world, I would assume, has eroded their capabilities. So even if the deal is the exact same, it does freeze Iran at a level that I think is okay. And so if President Trump claims victory, like it's the usual thing he always does. He claims a huge victory and it's like, meh, like it's not that exciting. But I don't think it's a vacuous deal completely. It's not like the Ukraine rare earth mineral nonsense or the Greenland stuff where you can literally say like you got kind of nothing. In this case, well, you did get to bomb them for a month and a half and then, but in other words, let me put it this way, Jacob. If he gets the exact same deal that was on the table pre-bombing, I think US won. Because you got to bomb them for a month and a half. Think about it for a second. This is what nobody's really putting into context. Like, America and Israel got to bomb Iran for a month and a half. If Iran then sits down at the table with them and says, well, why you guys are so mean? We had this deal in Oman. Why did you? I bet you anything Trump looks them straight in the eye and says, listen, brothers, I love you, but I just wanted to kind of bomb you for a month and a half.
Cousin, this is a safe space. So yeah, I can tell that your Trump derangement syndrome is afflicting you. And I'm not gonna be that guy that points out all the ways that you're wrong. I honor your truth.
But tell me. No. Like, okay. Let me say one thing. I mean, one way in which I'm wrong is like, but was the crisis worth it? Was the economic crisis worth it? And to which I will say, like, what economic crisis? I mean, I guess there will be consequences of the straits being shut down. It's going to take time to restart production, but don't forget, there's a lot of ships sitting anchored in the Persian Gulf that will solve some of the supply chain issues. Like, what is the permanent damage other than to U.S. reputation and potentially the petrodollar system that underpins the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency? Other than those things, though, and by the way, I pity you if you listen to this at like 1.6 speed, because like you definitely didn't catch my caveats there.
I can't believe anybody listens to this.
No, they all do. They all
really?
do, Jacob. Yeah, a lot of our listeners are like at 1.6, which is crazy.
I gotta slow down then.
You gotta slow down. Otherwise, you don't get our sexy, sultry voices in like their full, well, mostly Jacob's.
Yeah, I paid a lot of money for this microphone. I hope that you all are.
But anyways, like, tell me, like, why, like,
there's a couple different angles I could take, but I think one is most important. So I'll just limit myself to this one. The deal is not vacuous. You're right. If Iran will change its behavior as a result of it. And I don't think anything that has happened
behavior
will change Iran's behavior. In fact, I think all of the things that have happened will just make Iran double down on the things that they have been doing for years, which is resistance, which is development of nuclear weapons and ballistic missile systems, which is opposing the United States at every single turn, which is weaponizing what supply chains they can in terms of energy, all these other things. I think that, you have not done anything to make this Iranian regime change the way it's going to act. Like, I think that's it. And honestly, like the JCPOA from Obama was somewhat the same. It fails my same test here because you had a weak outgoing US president who was working with a weak outgoing pragmatic Iranian president who was trying to limit the power of the IRGC. This is Hassan Rouhani. And then you get Trump comes in and gosh, now I'm forgetting who came after Rouhani.
JCPOA was
but it
also
doesn't matter.
shitty.
Like
So you were telling
Yeah,
the
because
context.
because like, you know, the idea with JCPOA was you're going to give the Iranians access to money and all these different things, and because they are accessing what the West thinks everybody wants, they will change their behavior. This, by the way, is the exact same fundamentally flawed logic that the West did with China when they welcomed China into the WTO. It's copy and paste. It's the same idea. Oh, they're going to liberalize because suddenly they have access to dollars and development and things like that. Like, it's just a fundamental misunderstanding of how these societies work. But it just didn't happen. Instead, it actually, you had a hardliner that came after Rouhani and pushed back against the system, and the IRG double ensconced itself. And Iran did stop. I mean, I think most of the data shows, or at least what the IAEA was showed that Iran actually did pause enrichment, that it lived up to its enrichment part of the provisions in the JCPOA,
Right.
but there was nothing in the JCPOA that talked about the delivery system, aka missiles and rockets. So they started going crazy with development of missiles and rockets and things like that. And by the way, a nuclear warhead is basically worth nothing unless you can put it on a missile and you can accurately hit whatever target you want to hit in general. So sure, Obama got some pause on enrichment. They were already pretty close though on that. They could afford to press pause and continue on the missile development system. And that offer of rejoining the family of nations and everything else like that, it fell on deaf ears, which is why if you hear the folks out there who are trying to spin this as optimistic, and I have a few of them are friends, I won't name who he is, but I had a friend who texted me, and I don't think he listens to the pod. But my other friend on the chain does. But my friend texted me and was like, well, maybe there is going to be peace in the Middle East. This deal makes too much sense for Iran. They give up the nuclear program and they get money and they get to rejoin the family of nations. Okay, listen in. They don't care. That's not what they want. Go even to the foreign minister and read what he's talking about in terms of resistance and what resistance means to Iran. I know that you all think this stuff is stupid. They believe it. They've devoted their entire lives to it. Our founders devoted their lives, sacred honor, blah, 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 to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, and also being able to hold slaves and all of the economic freedom and religious freedom that they could have. These guys, lives, sacred honor, everything else, for this system of resistance. They don't care that they're going to get access to this money. They want things on their terms. So I think there's just this fundamental misunderstanding that you're going to offer them to rejoin the family of nations. And they're going to be like, well, thank you. That was all we really wanted. Here is our nuclear program. Here are our missile programs. We will give them all to you. Like, that's not going to work. And if that is Trump's like litmus test, if that's what he's expecting out of this, and that's what allows him to say that it's not a vacuous deal, I don't think that's going to happen. So he has to accept the vacuousness of his own deal to have the deal. And I think he will. I think he'll be able to convince himself that it's real. But anyway.
Right. But to go back to my point, unlike Obama, who you're arguing also got a vacuous deal, Trump got to bomb Iran for a month and a half. And this is what
Mazel. And achieved what? What did he achieve?
Mowed the grass.
He mowed the grass. I mean, that's not a that's spoken like a true Israeli short-sighted geopolitical tactician. I know, that's not a viable strategy for the United States. And at what cost?
But what's
not
the
just reputationally, but like internally inside the United States. When I was talking to a fertilizer expert, we spent $50+ billion in the first week of this war. You could probably make the U.S. a fertilizer supergiant with 10 bill. Can we just do that? Did you see the statistics on the relative percent of GDP that the defense budget is going to be compared to other things? We're going to spend more dollars than we did on World War II, which goes back to one of our original arguments, which means, is the Trump administration actually going to engage in stimulus? I see you doing the work. Not interrupt me. You can interrupt. Just go in. Don't let the geopolitical bingo people get to you, cousin.
Well, listen. Okay, first of all, your fertilizer guy is just, like he sees a nail and he's going to hammer it, but he's right. Both helium and fertilizers out of the Middle East are a byproduct of natural gas production process. Like, we're going to figure this shit out. Let's not be the guy who shall rename nameless, because we don't want to be mean to our colleagues on the sell side. The guy who called the neon gas crisis of 2022 that never fucking happened.
Oh, I don't know who did that.
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. Okay.
But it was like one of the worst takes ever, because you and I can make neon gas in the fucking kitchen. But like, the fertilizer and helium that we are going to have problems with, they're byproduct of natural gas. Last time I checked, Qatar is not the only country on the planet that does natural gas. So that's the first. Let's put that aside, though. My point is, like, you are arguing that it's really difficult to change Iran's behavior. You are also arguing that, like, it's very dangerous to go to war with them. because they sit astride a strait that has all these things. All I'm saying is if those are both true, if Obama didn't get a good deal and Trump is not going to get the exact same thing, but then the best we can do is every 10 years, rinse and repeat and just kind of set them back a little bit. And one thing that I will not allow you to make an argument about is that it is set back. It's absolutely set back. Like Iranian nuclear program, almost every facility associated with it has been bombed. Like enrichment, what centrifuges? Like, do they have any? Like there's been cybersecurity attacks by Israel. So like we cannot, like it's objectively a fact they've been set back. Now your point is like, but you haven't changed anything. And I'm like agreeing with you violently, but neither did Obama's deal, but his did not set them back because there was no bombing. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. No, I think that's fine. I would like agree to all that, but that doesn't change the fact that the deal is like, and again, like I'm imposing a litmus test, which is does whatever deal is coming change Iran's
But how do you do that?
Well, I mean, I want to be smarmy and say, well, you remember I said if in January they had taken out the supreme leader and assassinated one of the people in the streets, but that's a non-falsifiable thesis.
That's tough.
But I think the deeper point is if you can't achieve the objective, then don't try. There's no reason to try to do something that is impossible. In fact, it's a huge mistake to try to do something that is impossible. System has been building up in this, pressure has been building in the Iranian system for years. The sanctions were doing what they were supposed to do, cutting Iran off, not from the family of nations and liberal values and blah, 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 but cutting them off from money, cutting them off from nice things. They can watch on social media now what it's like to live.
This is where I'm going to interrupt you by just saying amen.
Please. Yeah.
No, amen. Amen. No, look, listen. There was a plan out there to just apply the pressure that Venezuela had applied as well. So if you had applied a financial pressure and they maybe had someone other than Israel kill the leader because sensitivity, I think you're getting onto something. You're getting onto the fact that there was an alternative. And it was the financial pressure. It would have just taken a long time. And I think this is where the success of Venezuela, as I said on our podcast on January 3rd, you dear listeners, go listen to Chuck Norris Premium, rest in peace legend. Like the downside of that having been so successful was that they rushed it. They could have just waited, as you say. But I will go on something else and point out like where I disagree with you, and now I'm gonna like go from TDS DS to like full on like rainbows and unicorns liberal. Where I disagree with you, like, are we sure Iran is all that bad? Like, I mean, look, from Israel,
like,
listen.
By what metric? You mean
from
like
Israel's
internationally
perspective,
or like domestically or?
From Israel's perspective, God bless Israel, like totally understand all Israeli reaction function. However, like, and like, I took off my TDS DS hat just to put on my, I guess, like, pinko liberal, but also at the same time Tucker Carlson hat on. But like,
it's a confusing world out there, right?
It's a confusing world out there. But like, Iran has, on occasion, shown that it can be actually a security partner of the US. Now, the critics who are not self-immolating are going to say, what are you talking about? But like Islamic State was at one point, not so long ago, the biggest threat to the Middle East, if not beyond. And Iranian IRGC paramilitaries, combined with Iraqi Shia militias that were taking orders from Tehran, collaborated with the American Air Force in Iraq to stop the Islamic State charge on Baghdad. Like these guys, after they took Mosul, they were in the suburbs of Baghdad. And we know the Iranians were like calling in airstrikes from warthogs.
And that was the background of the JCPOA too, by the way. It was that trust that allowed Obama and Rouhani to do things. And yes, on that level, Iran is better than the Islamic State. Like,
no,
cool.
But like
low bar,
fine.
But sure.
They also helped Iraq. They also helped the US with Afghanistan. They shared intelligence after 9/11. Iran had nothing to do with 9/11, obviously. They resented and were afraid of Sunni terrorism. So like, I'm not defending Iran. I'm just saying that like Iran has not been historically a monolith throughout its history. It has cooperated with the US at times. And I think that cooperation could have been built on. I mean, let's not forget one thing you didn't say in your tirade. The US canceled the JCPOA.
Mm-hmm.
It was the US. It's not like some hardliner came into power in Iran and that was the reason. Fuck no. The US did that. And so what I would say effectively, if we're going to blame President Trump for anything, it's not the vacuous deal he's going to get. It's that he got out of the original vacuous deal that we already had.
Well, and it's probably also true, by the way. I mean, if you go back and watch the 60 Minutes interview that caused so much controversy for Kamala Harris, I thought that was a really weird interview for a lot of different reasons at the time. But one of the weirdest was because she was talking about Iran as the biggest geopolitical threat to the United States. And I remember watching it and being like, what? What are you talking about? Like, I get that coming out of the Trump administration or out of John Bolton, but what are you doing going on 60 Minutes talking about this? And to your point, like, yes, like trusting sanctions or trusting financial pressure takes a long time. The United States had a long time. This wasn't like Iraq, where we were dependent on Middle Eastern oil, where it was a critical existential matter of energy security. 9/11 had just happened. I mean, I think the second Iraq war was stupid for a lot of different reasons. But you didn't have time then. We didn't know the shale revolution was coming. We have time. The United States famously doesn't need these things. All you've done is allow Iran to use the lever. But I would also push back a little bit against the characterization about, is Iran that bad? I mean, is any country that bad? Like, if you go back through the history of any country, you are going to find terrible things and atrocities. The United States has the benefit of most of its atrocities being hundreds of years ago, but go back and read what the United States did in the early decades of its founding. It's just as bad as anything we're going to talk about here. I don't think comparative suffering and that stuff does that much. But the two things I would say about Iran, number one, at a domestic level, it's a thuggish, theocratic, awful regime that does terrible things to its people. So that's first. The second is, and this is where I think people, I mean, it's a legit conflation, but there's Hezbollah and there's Iran as a sponsor of terrorism and of terrorist groups, and then there's Iran itself. Now, Iran has some level of plausible deniability, but just go look at all the terrorist actions that Hezbollah engaged in the 1980s and 1990s. I won't exhaust listeners with the list here, but all of the hijackings and all the assassinations and the bombings on U.S. embassies and the bombings on the Beirut barracks, like all these other things.
Buenos
Aires. I mean, like, Iran has been behind lots of things that are terrible. But here's the thing that I don't think you will say, which I will say because who cares? Compare their record to the Saudis. Compare their record to the Saudis and the groups that Saudi Arabia has sponsored and the ideology that Saudi Arabia has spread and the domestic regime inside Saudi Arabia. I get it. They invited Toby Keith, may his memory be a blessing, a couple of years ago.
Toby Keith, man,
movie
come on.
Theaters. Cool.
That
what did they do to Jamal Khashoggi around
though.
the same time? Like, what are they doing to people who steal a loaf of bread still? Like, yeah, like I can't, I always choke on that hypocrisy. But yeah, Toby Keith, pour one out.
I mean, to go back defending Iran.
I knew I would go too far and you'd be like, whoa.
No, I'm actually going to just triple down on this. But like your examples of Hezbollah terrorism are from 80s and 90s. Now, I understand they do launch rockets into Israel. I mean, like, but Israel kind of does the same. So,
No, I'll interrupt you once. The whole thing is an anachronistic conflict. The terrorist attacks are largely from the 80s and 90s. The Iranian Revolution is a Cold War relic. And it also goes back to the CIA being involved in the Brits trying to nationalize Iranian oil industry and the Iranians saying nothing. Like, one of the stupid things about this conflict is that we are so far now from the thing that started it. You remember that moment in the first Iran war where Donald Trump said the most brilliant thing he said while he was in office, where he was like, when he was asked about the Israelis and Iranians violating that ceasefire. And he was like, these people have been bombing each other so long, they don't know what the fuck they're doing, to quote the president.
The best. That's
He's
wisdom.
The same. I'm sorry. And this is where all the Trump acolytes, all this thing, he's going to drain the swamp. He's separate from the swamp. He is the swamp, baby. Kamala would have probably done the same thing if that 60 Minutes interview was right. So the swamp wanted Iran.
Well, it depends, though.
And Trump went, he resisted in the first term. He resisted as long as he could. He resisted when the Israelis tried to bring him in. but he just couldn't resist the
But wait a
swamp.
minute.
He just had to. He
I
just
know. I
had to
hear
do
that.
it. You know.
I hear that argument, but let's pump the brakes on that.
Ooh, drink. It's time
Boom.
to drink.
Like, let's pump the brakes. Obviously, this is a big if, right? But if this conflict is now over, like 3,000 people died in Iran, 3,000 plus. Well, I don't even know. I apologize if I make a mistake, but I think it's several dozen in Israel, 3,000 in Lebanon, but don't blame that on President Trump. And then like 12 service members. Like, let's not compare how much Trump is captured by the deep state compared to 20 years of warfare in Iraq and Afghanistan. Like, this is still an excursion by any measure. This is still gunboat diplomacy of 19th century. This is still a very short excursion. Like, if it ends right now. Now, if it goes off the track and President Trump doesn't know how to land this plane, then yeah, I think the accusation will be cogent. But I'm not sure that Kamala Harris could have, both escalated to a conflict with Iran and then just de-escalated by saying God bless them and then walking away even though the deal's vacuous. I think it would be very difficult for someone who's more establishment to do that.
I don't know. I think her propensity to word salad would have worked maybe just
in her
as well
favor.
as
There you go. She was eminently qualified.
She wouldn't have done it intentionally. She wouldn't have had Donald Trump's unique, I don't know, what do you call that? That charisma, the language that he uses. But listen, she could have just spouted nonsense until nobody knew what she was talking about, and it might have worked.
To go back to the original point, I'm not here to say anything about who's good or who's bad. Like, that's not what I do for a living, certainly. So all the listeners here, like, I'm not making a case for anybody being evil or good. I just do think it's a very complicated issue. And I think that there is no good way to do it. And so if Trump ends up with a deal that's vacuous, and we all kind of look through the fact that so was 2015 JCPOA, it is what it is.
Look, if this is what it took for Trump himself to follow through on his promise that the United States would be done in the Middle East, and if the United States is finally done in the Middle East after yet another failed endeavor, cool. If this is what it took to get out of its system. One of the interesting things that happened in the last 24 hours, the U.S. handed over all of its bases in Syria to the Syrian government. Cool. Like, for the first time in 11 years, we don't have American soldiers in Syria. Can you imagine 2-3 years from now, a world in which the United States actually is out of the Middle East and isn't bombing Iran and doesn't care what they're doing in Iran or all these other things, but instead is forging relationships in their own backyard with the big oil producers of Guyana and Brazil and rehabilitating Venezuela and doing things with Cuba? Like, this is the part of the Trump strategy that I have always thought was compelling. And if maybe he just needed to get it out of his system. Maybe the United States is so privileged as a geopolitical power that sometimes it just has to get stuff out of its system. It still couldn't let go of 79, and we just needed once to really show them once and for all what we could do.
You know what? That's actually a really compelling argument. It's kind of like if you have, sometimes chemistry just doesn't work. Like, you play basketball with the same crew of people, and there's just like a guy you don't have good chemistry with, and then it kind of blows up one time. And then after that, you guys are actually cool. Because finally, you took it there and it's like, what are we doing, bro? Like, this is just not that serious. So, maybe you're right. Maybe in order to close this chapter, from the US side, it needed to bare its teeth. One thing I will say though, again, from the American perspective, I understand the Israeli perspective, but from American perspective, you cited terrorism in the 80s and 90s. Like, holy fuck. Back then, you and I were playing with toy cars, but IRA, you know what I mean, was a terrorist organization too.
Yeah.
But since then, Iran, it definitely supported the insurgency against American troops in Iraq. 100%. Lots of Americans died directly as a result of that.
Sure.
And, that's, it's all fair in love and war. That's a war. I'm not quite sure if Iran didn't support the insurgency, it's not like the insurgency would not have happened.
Pakistan hit Osama bin Laden.
Yeah, thank you. And your point about Saudi Arabia, rich Saudis have been supporting all sorts of terrorist groups for sure, for a long time.
Where is Osama from?
Right, and all the hijackers. No, we all understand this. My point is more I do think that from the American perspective, this is where it's difficult to argue that tripling down on a war in Iran makes any sense, right? Because Iran does not actually threaten in an existential way, in any way, shape, or form, the United States.
The problem is that singling down on it didn't make any sense either. And the other and I mean, this is the real problem. Like, it's like, yes, like, and Trump does a great job of doing this, where he's done this terrible thing, and then people are so occupied with the terribleness of the thing that he's done that when he pulls out of the terrible thing, they're still talking about the terrible thing. And to your point, if you're opposed to some kind of Trump style JCPOA, you know, you're kind of dealing with the wrong thing. But I also like grant these people who are like, yeah, but what you did was objectively terrible. And it was terrible because you did not just, it's not about the US reputation. It's about the relationships that the United States is burning at every single turn with its allies, or maybe its erstwhile allies and things like that. And it's also, what could you have spent this money on? If you had focused on things domestically, what could you have done with this kind of investment or with this kind of verb? And I think it's a poor man's analogy, because I don't think Trump and Lyndon B. Johnson belong in the same class of human being when you're thinking about them. But the US would be a much different country today if Lyndon B. Johnson hadn't been led down the garden path and let himself be led down the garden path in Vietnam, and if he had just focused on the Great Society. And I think we can maybe now, in April 2026, say, and you know what? The US industrial revolution and nearshoring program would have been much more successful if President Trump had not wasted so much treasure for nothing in the Middle East. I mean, it's just a huge opportunity cost. What he could have done with this in the United States to make the United States stronger, and instead he decided to do this. And maybe he's not going to triple down on Iran, but he's tripling down on the military industrial complex. He's telling people you can't have healthcare and you can't have all education, and we can't afford these things, but give me more weapons.
Yeah, well, he's not going to get them, though, Jacob. This is where we still disagree on fiscal spending.
We'll see.
I mean, Congress is struggling to pass reconciliation bill for $100 billion. And they have 4.5 months to do it. And even if they do it, it's like $100 billion, right? Like, the Democrats come in, the spigot gets cut off. But there's another story here, which, actually one of our listeners, one of our fans, Pokemon Trader, I think it is, shout out to them as well. They've been asking us to talk about petrocurrency, petrodollars.
Mm-hmm.
So I think to take off my TDS DS hat on and put on the TDS hat, here is something that is tangible and that I think was and is threatened by this action. And it is basically all the oil producers in the Middle East, they sell oil. They sell it in dollars. And then they take those dollars and they buy American assets with it. It used to be treasuries almost exclusively. It's been equities as well. So if you're sitting right now listening to this and you're not like a finance wizard, just remember, like, your interest rate is probably slightly lower than it should be thanks to Saudi Arabia, who Jacob, by the way, does not like, but I'm perfectly fine and will go to a comedy festival in Riyadh if invited.
And by the way, I hope that they are. I hope the better angels of their nature are taking hold. Things are looking good. Like you
will go to a comedy festival in Riyadh. Shut up. Like, you will perform there. You will dance. But listen,
sure, I'll do the sword dance and I'll hold the glowing orb with President Trump himself. I'll do it all. That's fine.
Listen. But Jacob, like, so here's the thing. So this was a deal that was actually negotiated. It was secret for like 20 years or 30 years. President Nixon and Kissinger literally went to Saudi Arabia and they concluded this deal with the Saudis. And so the reason it's important is because it's one of the pillars of the US dollar reserve currency status. It's the least important. Everyone listening to this, let me just be very clear. This is the least, but by far the least important pillar. If there's a tripod of reasons and there's more, this is like, it's not actually a tripod. It's like a chair with like 7 legs. This is one of them. But nonetheless, it is important. And the fact of the matter is that it was predicated on the United States providing the 5th Fleet in Bahrain effectively to keep the oil flowing. It's not so much that the US has proven that it's incapable of doing that. It's kind of proven that, it will pursue interests on its behalf or maybe somebody else's behalf, not to be Tucker here. But like, from Saudi and UAE perspective, was this necessary? To your point, like Jacob Shapiro is saying, we could have spent this money on something else. We could have used economic sanctions. We could have empowered the Treasury Department to do its job with Iran as it has with others. All cogent points. From a Saudi perspective, it's also like, or maybe you could have just done nothing. Because now we have this situation where Iran is participating in managing the Strait or whatever. And so I think the odds of the petrodollar system being eroded on the margin are immense. Like if you're Saudi Arabia or UAE, you have to diversify. This is something that you will do. And so that means, yes, part of your oil sales probably should be in renminbi. And by the way, because America no longer imports any oil from the region, and it's almost exclusively going to Asia, it is perfectly cogent if they start diversifying away from the dollar as a tool of transacting, which means that they will not recycle all their proceeds in their current account surplus, their trade surplus, into necessarily U.S. assets. Maybe it'll be easier to do so in Chinese bonds.
Well, yeah, and I actually wrote something that was fairly good, like 4 years ago, that made this point, that said structurally the petrodollar is already dead. It's just there. We both worked with Roger Baker. One of my favorite concepts that Roger had that nobody else had was the concept of geopolitical inertia, that we don't accept that sometimes things just are and they will just be. All the petrodollar had going for it was geopolitical inertia, but that's a lot. Switching costs are hard and all these things like take a long time. President Trump, to your point, has ripped off the Band-Aid. So it was already clear structurally that this is what had to happen. But the Wizard of Oz was still pulling the levers. And the Fifth Fleet is the kabuki theater of all this. It's all gone now. Iran is like, cool. Like you can go through the Strait of Hormuz as long as you go through the route that we set. Like, great. That's what you got. You get the Trump JCPOA. And I think that's the real loss. Not only are you not going to change Iran's behavior, you've given them a weapon that they wouldn't have dare used before. And
you've reduced the reliance on the region on you as a security. Now, on the other hand, you might say, well, that will reduce the costs. And here's something I've said on this podcast many times and to my clients just in the world. One of the greatest geopolitical paradoxes over the past, 20, 30 years, well, no, actually less, like 10 years, since the shale revolution, one of the greatest paradoxes is that my taxpayers as a U.S. resident go towards securing Chinese oil supply via the Fifth Fleet that's in Bahrain that is not securing American supply. So effectively, like if the Saudis no longer want to put as much, I mean, they'll still have to put a lot of money in treasuries because it's the most liquid, bond market in the world, or second most. No, it is actually the most liquid. But like, if the Saudis don't want to, if they just cut that down a little bit, but U.S. gets to save costs on stationing all the troops in the Middle East, in net terms, it could be a wash. It could be. Like, I haven't done the math on that. So, like, if you're a MAGA, isolationist, America First type of person, I don't think it's a crazy point to make that, like, you will save a lot of money and therefore you won't need the Saudis to be buying your treasuries as much. But I do think there's a reputational costs, and this is one of them. And I think that that's the case with most of the things that Trump does. The deal itself, I can defend almost every deal that he's made, or vacuous deal or whatever. Like the deals themselves can be defended. The problem is that the effort that goes into getting them and the process often has these long tail reputational costs that I do think erode, U.S. standing. On the other hand, I think you could also argue in a multipolar world, it is what it is. American standing should be eroded because it should start acting exactly like every other country in the world.
Yeah, I mean, to make a rare American football metaphor rather than a basket, I'm sure we could find a basketball metaphor for this. It's sort of like when the Cowboys traded Herschel Walker to, I think it was the Minnesota Vikings, and I forget exactly how many draft picks Minnesota gave up to get Herschel Walker, who is a crazy person. But like the Dallas Cowboys dynasty begins because of all the draft picks that they accumulate from trading Herschel Walker, one of the greatest like athletes and like running backs of all time. But the Minnesota Vikings were like great. And so you can defend the Minnesota Vikings wanting Herschel Walker. Herschel Walker was an alien. Like, yeah, anybody would want Herschel Walker on your team. But did you really have to give up 18 players and draft picks?
Like, was that really worth it just so you could have crazy Herschel Walker on your team for a couple of years? Like, no, you can't build a team or build a global hegemon or even a regional power if you're going to be doing some of those things. So that's my rejoinder. And
That's
my
a
other
great.
rejoinder to you would be just the point about American tax dollars for the Fifth Fleet to protect Chinese oil flows. Just remember that the next part of that sentence is so that the Chinese can make all the goods that Americans purchase for cheaper than they could if they were made in the United States. So
Well,
like it's like part of,
But
if
it's
you
all
take
connected.
away that, like,
Yeah,
it's
no,
all
but-
connected. I'm just saying, if you take away the oil and take away the tax dollars, it's not that you're, allowing the Chinese to have oil. You're allowing them to have oil so that their economy can make the 5 different TVs that you bought for, $100 a
But
pop.
due to reductive properties, you should be okay with that ending because you are the biggest proponent of onshoring in America, though, in this podcast.
I don't feel like I have the luxury of opinions. I think it's a good idea if what you care about is geopolitical resilience, and if you think China's a long-term adversaries, I think you will. I mean, if you're asking, my personal opinion is free trade sounds good. If you can guarantee a peaceful system and nobody's going to launch attacks at each other, then sure, let the Chinese pollute their rivers and their waterways, refining rare earths and building these things.
You just nailed the world we're in. Like, right. By the way, I do want to double click on your interesting analogy because you did not pick my favorite. I started watching American football a little late in my life since I spent 18 years in the dying museum of a continent that's Europe, where we play a completely different game that is actually played with feet. But let's not get into that debate. The one that I would have picked is, of course, the 1999 case where your New Orleans Saints gave up their entire draft class for Ricky Williams.
I'm going to have to stop you right there. They are not my New Orleans Saints. I was born an hour outside Atlanta, Georgia.
Fight.
And I am an Atlanta Falcons fan, much to the chagrin of my wife, my wife's family, everyone that I come to. I went to a New Orleans Saints Atlanta Falcons game here in the Superdome. I guess it's the Caesar. I forget what they call it now. I was fully dressed in Falcons attire. I absorbed all of the ridicule from all of these assholes.
I survived.
Falcons have not won anything, by the way. Like, we are experts at losing. I really have had trouble watching football since 28-3. But
my point to you is, like, you were actually generous to the U.S. in that analogy because you were saying they're the Dallas Cowboys.
No, I was saying they're the Minnesota Vikings.
Oh, they're the Minnesota. Okay, fine. Well,
they're the Vikings.
In this one,
I'm saying, like, sure, you can defend the deal. I can defend the Vikings getting Herschel Walker. At what cost?
Yeah. No, with Ricky, you can't defend either the Washington or the New Orleans.
Well, he was pretty good. To show you just how good an analyst I am, by the way, when the Falcons were in the Super Bowl against the Patriots, and we had like this groundswell of national liberal support because Tom Brady was a friend of Trump, and everybody's like, all right, Falcons, go get him. First time anybody cared about the Atlanta Falcons in my life. I went to a watch party in Austin, Texas with my friend who was a diehard Patriots fan, and it was all his Patriots. I was the only Falcons fan there. Oof. And it got to halftime. It was 28-3, and these guys, they were true massholes. I don't know if Sam listens. Sam, if you're listening, I enjoy the story told from this vantage point. They were such assholes to me. They were so surly. They were like, put on your earmuffs if you have children in the car. Fuck you, Jacob. Like, fuck the Falcons. We hate it. And I'm not exaggerating. I literally said to them, guys, it's halftime. We are experts at losing things. Like, there is a lot of time left in this game. And so then, like, the game starts to go on and the tide shifts, and most people forget that I'm there. And when it's clear we're going to lose, I like made my Irish exit. I got most of the way to my car, and Sam comes running after me. He's like, Jacob. And he, like, grabs me by the shoulders, and he's like, I'm so sorry we said those things to you. And I'm like, it's okay. I'm used to it, but please let go of me. I'm going home.
Oh my God.
Anyway, I really haven't watched much football since then. I like
that's oh my, I did not know you were a Falcons fan. That was one of the greatest reversals ever.
We got season tickets to the Falcons in 1998, which was the year the other year they went to the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Jamal Anderson, that was my first experience of American football, and it was really sick.
That was at least you had 1998.
Some listener, this is a good chance to shout out the listeners who sent us some coffee. Because, by the way, listeners, if anybody is out there with a vintage Terrence Mathis jersey or T-shirt, I would like it. Send it to me, because Terrence Mathis is my favorite player. But Marko, shout out, or do I need to find his information real fast? Shout out the guy who sent you some coffee.
I think you should find the information really quick because
Okay,
you
I'm gonna
told
find the-
I was. So by the way, the background here is that Jacob did a podcast in I think Ethiopia, right?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
And one of the listeners was very grateful because they actually sourced some of their beans from there. And Jacob made this point on one of our podcasts, to which I responded, well, I guess we know who the world's favorite cousin is, because I felt left out. And so Jacob.
And then I got a message from Peter Shirley from Blue Copper Coffee in Salt Lake City, Utah, and he messaged me and said, "Hey, I love the podcast. Happy to send you or Marko some coffee. Just tell me whether whole bean or ground. And I hope if you're listening to this podcast, the answer to that question is whole bean. If it's
coffee.
Ground,
Just stop listening.
my estimation of you just went down. Also, remember, I'm the elitist on this podcast, so my estimation of you is already pretty low. But I said no. Send the coffee to Marko because I've already had my coffee from a listener. Have you already had some? Was it good?
I just received it today, actually. Just like it came, and I just want to say to Peter, like, you are officially the first ever sponsor of Geopolitical Cousins because you have sent us coffee, and we're going to shout out again. It's Utah's. What was it? Blue
Copper.
Blue Copper.
Blue Copper.
So Blue Copper Coffee, Salt Lake City. Blue Copper Coffee. Go there and buy some of their obviously whole bean. Duh. Like,
I thought, can't Mormons not have caffeine? Is that a bad joke to make?
Well, not everybody in Salt Lake City is Mormon, Jacob. Jeez, man.
Sorry. Just asking. Sorry, Peter. Sorry if I really just ruined the call out there in general.
Yeah.
All right.
Politically correct cousins, like that. That is us.
Here we are.
Okay, wait. You before we wrap up, I know you got to go because it's late.
No, we got two things we got to talk about. I wanted to for our last 10 minutes.
I was going to tie it together.
Well, before we tie it together, maybe you could tie him in. I think we have to do a brief happy trails to Viktor Orbán. I don't think we can end the episode without at least happy trails to Viktor. And I think we'll do more. We're going to have our geopolitical leaders draft here in the next week or two, so we can spend more time then. But we should do a little happy trail.
I sure hope so, cousin Jacob. If this fucking Iran war would just end, we can go back to doing what we actually do for.
I told you I'm done with this. I didn't pay attention today. I was at the doctor all day.
You're done with it, but it's okay. Look, so yes, once it's over, we got to redo our list. Was Viktor Orbán on either one of our lists?
He was on mine, I believe.
Yeah, it smells like you would give a shout out to Viktor Orbán.
Yeah, it's the way I cover up my bleeding heart liberalism.
But just like giving props to. I mean, look, actually, you know what? He did some good things for Hungary. I know everybody's going to be aghast at that, but he sometimes bargained really hard with Europe, and he wasn't suicidal. I mean, he would back off when needed. I'm sure he would have backed off on some of his policies after this election, because that juicy 10 billion euro is very sweet tasting. One thing I will say, I think way too much is being made out of this. Magyar, his replacement is, center right, if not right wing. And I'm not saying that, too. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. I would say there's two things about what just happened. First of all, this has been going on in Europe for 15 years, but nobody bothers to check. So when journalists talk about like Swedish Democrats or True Finns or Geert Wilders or Giorgia Meloni or Marine Le Pen
family. Yep.
Yeah, they always say, oh, the far right in this. Listen. The cat is out of the bag. Every politician in Europe knows that the way to win is to be anti-immigrant, rhetorically Eurosceptic, blaming Brussels for everything. But other than those two things, for the most part, all of these leaders have accepted European integration because the people of Europe want it, and have accepted the institutions that underpin both European integration, European economy, and European geopolitical security. Because thanks to Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, Europe is integrating further. Orbán messed up on this. He went too far. The whole thing that like George Soros and Brussels and, are besetting Hungary. Hungary is a wonderful place. How is it beset with enemies? Like, he just sounded like a raving lunatic. And this is what happens when you stay in power for 16 years. You start making errors because you're probably surrounded by ass kissers. And so he lost. He lost to a guy who is anti-immigrant, who did not vocally support the Pride Parade in Budapest, which is like, like a pretty minimal level of like liberalism, for God's sakes. Like, but that's what Magyar didn't do any of those things. He is pretty right wing, but he's pro Europe, pro integration, and hell yeah, he's going to take that 10 billion euros. So I don't think this is as monumental as people think. I just think it's what happens in parliamentary democracies. They breed complacency by leaders because you effectively elect a dictator. And I mean this in a nice way. Like parliamentary democracy, you have so much power, you have no real opposition, you win a mandate from parliament, you get to do whatever you want. And if you've been in power for that long, we've seen this with Helmut Kohl, we've seen this with Jean Chrétien, we've seen with this Margaret Thatcher, many leaders who you would consider like great leaders of a nation eventually left in an ignominious end. They met an ignominious end because of that. And that's simply what happened here. This isn't some sort of a like trend in Europe. That said, I think what's interesting is how young his opponent is. I do think that there is something, if you want to make a big deal about this, don't make it about European integration because that's already solved. No one is Eurosceptic in Europe, people. Like check your data, like check your update your reality. Europe is integrating. Europe is integrating further. What is interesting though is he's young, good-looking guy.
Yes, yeah.
And I think that's, I think it's going to be very, very difficult for anyone to get elected other than millennial and young. I think poor Gen X is going to be completely skipped over.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I've spent a fair amount of time in Budapest. And I confess I never, and I think part of the story around Orban is like the weird obsession that the American right and our boy Tucker and all these guys had with him, because I mean, he wasn't particularly successful. And he did do some things that were vaguely illiberal. I mean, he definitely tried to weaken the opposition, but at the same time, like the election result shows you that he didn't destroy Hungarian democracy.
No, he got crushed.
Yeah,
he got obliterated, man. Like,
yeah, he was just, but for a long time, he was just better at the game than everybody else. And people whined about him being better at the game by saying, oh, he's like, an illiberal, awful authoritarian. It's like, no, like this doesn't happen to Vladimir Putin. This doesn't happen to Xi Jinping. So I don't know. I just think he's kind of strange. I just want to, I'll steal your double click. This is a tweet from Justin Slaughter. He clipped tweeted a small clip of a Mamdani speech. And Mr. Mamdani quoted, I'll quote him. He says, if you are a Mario Kart fan, government is Yoshi and philanthropy is the golden mushroom. That edge we need to beat Bowser on, the rainbow road. To belabor this metaphor even further, Bowser is corporate greed in this scenario. And Justin Slaughter said, welcome, dear friends, to millennial political supremacy. This will be our politics for the next 50 years. Sorry, Zoomers. And he was just making a joke. I think that's, and this gets to your point about Magyar, that actually is the point. This isn't about communism. Mamdani's not a communist. He went and shook hands with President Trump. He's a millennial. Boom. This is millennialism. We need to start talking about what the political ideology of the millennials will be, because it's not going to be communism. It's not going to be your old fashioned like things. It's going to be interesting combinations of other different things. And they came of age in the digital world, but they also remember the world before it. And that it, like, life was really good when they started out, and now it's kind of crazy. Like it's an interesting think about what millennialism is in democratic politics. I think that's a thing we need to sit with and think about for some time. I will be after watching that speech. So thanks to Justin for the joke, because you opened up a whole window of analysis for me.
I think that's a great point.
I just exactly cuts to the Magyar.
I don't know what the answer is, but I mean, look, Hungary had all sorts of weird idiosyncrasies, like their prime minister Ferenc Gyurcsány. Really, I mean, like that country got taken to the woodshed by the great financial crisis. Like there was all sorts of problems. And so it really opened up for these massive victories by Orban. And I think that we kind of overstated how illiberal the country is. It was just a really like the death of the Hungarian center left was one of the political consequences of the great financial crisis. More so than any other country. Really, like if you think about it, I can't really think of another place where there was such a revolt. And then, I mean, Orban just had a free hand for 16 years since then. I mean, it's exactly what happened, and he got old.
Well, and just remember, Orban himself also like came of age as a young liberal anti-communist firebrand. Like he was of the left. He's very much like from a particular time and a particular place. So, all right, to do another bingo thing, land the plane, cousin, because I know you want to talk about TMZ in Washington D.C.
Well, you started off by saying something we didn't really expand on, which is that Iranian officials are issuing statements on X. So that was, we never actually returned to that. Your opening monologue, which, always launches our podcasts, we never really like spent any time on that. And I did think that was really important. We are in a world where our good friend Citrini is out there sending, like his employees through the Strait of Hormuz, which is something that is kind of investigative journalism should be doing.
Yeah, I'm ready to go through the Strait of Gibraltar at our listeners' pleasure. Just send your Bitcoin to my wallet at any point, and I
prefer a 30-foot yacht. Yeah, 30 feet is like my minimum, but like, and also I don't know how to sail because I'm from the third world. I don't know. You went to Cornell though, so like.
What? So I know how to sail? We had a swim test, not a sailing test. Come on.
Did you maybe Lake Champlain or whatever? But yeah, so like to me, it's really interesting the world we're in, and you pointed it out. There's X, there's investment research now includes like kind of cool gonzo journalism that I secretly like am so mad I didn't do. And then finally, we've got, while I was in DC this very week, we had the grand opening of TMZ offices in Washington, DC. And I would say that we're part of the same trend. Like you and I work for investors and we work for serious clients doing, like political analysis. And the Geopolitical Cousins podcast is popular because why? Why? It's popular because we have this nexus of finance, politics, macro geopolitics, where we're creating a new rail of entertainment. So if you think about entertainment, there's celebrities, which is really TV and movies, right?
And now politicians, but yeah.
Sports, and now politicians. And that's why I think the TMZ moved to Washington, D.C. We all know what they're going to do. They're going to be covering politicians as if they are, reality stars. And they are. And they are.
That is the Trumpification of politics. That is the Trumpification. At his core, he's a reality TV. I mean, it was TMZ that spotted Senator Lindsey Graham at Walt Disney World in late March of this year and watched him walking around Disney World with a bubble wand. Like, get used to it. This is what it's going to be like. And by the way, this will drive whatever virtuous people were left who wanted to engage in politics. This will be the nail in the coffin. Like our boy Senator Tillis. By the way, I sent a podcast link to Senator Tillis and his staff saying, "Hey, we shout him out all the time. We love him." So Senator Tillis isn't going to run for president if TMZ is running around Washington. He's going to go back to North Carolina or wherever, start doing whatever he wants, because who wants to mess with this?
But you know what? One thing that I would say is that it's all in the open. And for the longest time, I had a very elitist view of like Kagan, that this is really bad. Sorry, Kennan. George Kennan's view that like democracy should not be interfering with diplomacy. And it's a very, very much a view that like the plebs should not decide what their interest rates should be. Like the Fed is staffed by academics and the FOMC and so on. So, the argument is, why should foreign policy be? On the other hand, if you've got the deputy speaker of Iranian parliament and Trump tweeting at each other in the open, I wonder if he takes the edge off. What if I'm wrong? What if my elitist view that only learned men, with monocles and top hats in smoke-filled rooms should do diplomacy behind closed doors and that will make shit better. But did it though? 20th century was the deadliest century in human history. And there was no Twitter. Yeah, there was radio propaganda, but like there were wars even when the smoke-filled rooms with monocle sporting elitists.
No, I mean, that point is fair. I don't know how to apply it to an international context. I'll tell you that when I think about this question, if you go back to FDR couldn't walk. And the media, knew this and decided not to let the American public know. There was a fiction that was kept up that FDR was not as crippled as he actually was. And it was because it was respect of the office and all these other things. Which is like TMZ coming to Washington is the opposite of that. Can you imagine today if Joe Biden had been paralyzed or if Donald Trump is paralyzed in some kind of accident, like what the media would do? And I don't know that we can speak about it in terms of international politics. Your point there is well taken. But if you go back and read your Federalist Papers, the United States was not designed to be a democracy. I think the question that you're asking about is a real litmus test of just how much do you really believe in democracy? Because if you really believe in radical democracy, yeah, you want TMZ out there doing this, and you want it all out in the open, and you want all transparency and all these other things. That's not what the founders wanted. The founders wanted checks and balances. They wanted republicanism. They wanted folks who elect experts, and then the experts make these decisions, and there are restrictions on who is allowed to help elect the experts so that you can control the mob, because the mob will only ever lead to, special interests hijacking the presidency and hijacking policies in government, which is what has happened to the United States in sort of slow motion ever since the Eisenhower administration, and which was accelerated by Citizens? What is it called? Citizens Now? My brain's
United?
left me because. Citizens United, right? Like the infiltration of money into the system. If you want to see American politics really change, I've always said this, like if you gave me, I could do one thing to American politics to fix it. Spending in elections for every single candidate is capped at $25. Go have fun. See what happens. See how fast some of these things start to resolve themselves and who rises and who falls.
I think you're right. I try to spin it in a positive way, but truth is,
I'll spin it let me spin it your way for a second. That is, to your point, an elitist and mistaken point of the world. These were pearl-clutching old men who were just latching onto their privilege and saw the rise of the proletariat and of the common person and of women and of black people and said, absolutely not. These dirty people can't be making these decisions. I will no longer have my coffee or my tea or all these other things. They must be kept out of government. And democracy says, no. Like, let everyone have a voice, let them elect someone. And if you don't like them, then you do what just happened to Orban. You get rid of them. And that will at least get you the greatest attempt at electing you. I think the problem with the United States now is that it's bastardized both. It's not a true democracy and it's not a true Republican government. It's like somewhere in between, and it has no sense of itself and how it's supposed to work. But I think you could make an argument for radical democracy, sort of like Greek style in Athens. Once you start to get bigger, it starts to be difficult. But I get it. Like it's an elegant point.
I mean, I am bathed in aloof indifference, and I'm a professional nihilist. But I will say one thing: if this is the direction we're headed, then I'm happy we have this podcast, because if foreign policy is to be more like democratic, then people have to have high quality foreign policy analysis. And I'm not saying that like we are right. That's not what I mean. Like we disagree with each other and we are wrong. There's Muppets on our cover. But I do think we're much more Bill Simmons kind of basketball analysis than we're Stephen A. Smith. Like I will say that. And I think that's what we need to provide the public. Because right now the public has two things. You go on YouTube and watch some psychopaths tell you about some bullshit. Or you go and listen to a CFR podcast and, love my good friend Jim Lindsay, but like, holy fuck, dude, no one's gonna listen to that. So there's like two ways. Like normal people need something that makes foreign policy interesting and fun, and I hope we're doing that. And I'm hoping. What I really hope is that when we drop a reference to like Iran-Iraq war, you don't have to go out and like read a book about it, but at the very least, like go to Wikipedia and check the references of what we're talking about. If we're wrong, hit us up on X, make fun of us, But I do think that if we're entering a TMZ world, there's no way to stop it, Jacob. Like none. There's only way is to get people to start thinking that foreign policy and geopolitics are cool enough to spend an hour with us and then read about it and watch some cool movies and so on and so on.
I'll do you one further. I mean, because it's not just the democratization of access to politics, it's also that celebrities are becoming political figures. And in some sense, Reagan began this, although he was kind of a different one.
Yeah, not really.
But Donald Trump is the real, like he's a reality TV star, and he was a media personality, and he becomes president.
I mean, how many times have you seen the polls? He carried Home Alone. Like, I don't know.
But how many polls have you seen that says that, Dwayne The Rock Johnson would win the presidency if he would just throw his hat into the election? Crystal Meth Rumsfeld is a Fox News host. He was somebody who parlayed that. So I would actually take you one further. Bill Simmons' greatest hope is that somebody's going to listen to his podcast and say, Bill, you got to be GM of my team. That's what he's always been angling for. He even talks about it sometimes, if I could just be the GM of this team, what would I do? It's why he's in the trade machine all the time. I think the deeper point to your thing is, yes, that's what we want to provide. It's a good time to have a geopolitical podcast. It's a good time in our careers because, we've talked about this before. There's not going to be any junior analysts anymore because it's all going to be AI, and the older analysts are kind of crazy. So as long as you're in the middle and you have a reputation, it's a really nice place to be. But cousin, if you're right, the call for you to become Secretary of State is coming.
Well, first of all,
be there. So just prepare yourself, and it'll be a Muppet. You can have replace the seal with Muppets on the seal rather than the
I will say this: I am bathed in aloof indifference. I don't think my style of analysis will work. But also, you're talking about young Bill Simmons. Young Bill Simmons, before that Spotify money, would have taken that job right away. This Bill Simmons ain't taking anybody's job. So God bless our Lord and Savior, Bill Simmons. So
it's nice to have Spotify pay you a bunch of money. Spotify, if you were listening.
But in the meantime, until you show up, Blue Copper Mountain or Blue Copper Coffee, we got to get our reading. No one's ever going to be a sponsor if this is how we do it. Can you check the name again? Blue Copper, right? Blue Copper Coffee.
It's authentic. And I just want to point out to the Houthis, you really missed your chance. You could have been the first sponsor of the Geopolitical Cousins podcast, and you let Blue Copper just slide in there with some coffee beans. What are you guys doing? Stop chewing the cot and send in your proposal. We're listening.
Let's give them a proper shout out. Blue Copper Coffee. There we go. The website is just Blue Copper SLC for saltlakecity.com. So bluecopperslc.com. Thank you so much for the coffee. I hope some of the cousin fans go out there and get some of their whole bean grounds. Thank you for the free coffee. And everybody else, good luck out there.
Good luck out there. We'll see you soon.
Stay caffeinated.